Andreina, Lutz, Mirik, welcome to the second episode of our Nocturnal series. Welcome.
Hi,
Thank you.
Hello.
We are very happy to co-host you together with Andreina because we had already the first episode of our series in which we introduced this whole interesting but also very, very broad topic of the nighttime governance. And today we would like to discuss from action to policy. So basically to talk to the two of you, Lutz and Mirik, and ask you about the journey you've been on for many, many years already. So we're very happy to have you here. And I heard this is not very often that actually the two of you are in the same panel or in the same podcast. So I'm even more excited.
It's really great to be here. I'm looking forward. Yeah, I mean, Mirik and I, we are traveling the world and talk on different panels, and we also tend to repeat because we have similar experiences. But in this podcast, I think we will trying to add on each other's. So let's do the best.
That's great. No repetition today.
Yes.
And I'm very happy about that. But let us start. And I just wanted to ask you, Andreina, because when we've been preparing our series, you've said this is such an important thing to start with and discuss how this whole the nighttime governance field was changing. And you said that Lutz and Mirik are the people that we really, really need to talk to. Can you tell the listeners why?
Of course, yes. So we like to talk about this as a global movement because for the past, I would say 10, 15 years, it's been growing from a very niche field of night studies around the world that began in academia, mostly in the universities in Europe and some in North America. But now it has percolated to many other spheres. There's more than 80, I would say, Mirik, you will correct me if I'm wrong, cities around the world that have appointed specialized dedicated offices of night mayors, night managers, SARs. And also there's many, many people studying the field, doing projects around it. So this growth has been exponential over particularly the past 5 years after COVID. And there's these two people these two fantastic guests we have today, Mirik and Lutz, have been there from the inception. And they are in their respective cities are responsible for promoting this movement and also spreading it around the world. From Mirik's perspective, it's really interesting to see how, since he was appointed the night mayor in Amsterdam in 2012, if I'm not wrong, his role not only became relevant within Amsterdam, but then he spent a lot of time traveling around the world, explaining to the world what was the relevance of having this dedicated foundation, this dedicated body that liaises with the city and talks about from a proactive perspective, what is the relevance of the nighttime economy and the night culture for a city as a productive, as an inclusive, and as an innovative mechanism. And then also in Berlin, in Lutz's case, Lutz has been involved in the nighttime economy and the night culture in the city since forever, since you were right after high school even, right? And he's been the spokesman and executive board member for the Berlin Clubcommission since 2009, and has been involved from the advocacy perspective in promoting this field and promoting creative industries locally, but then also internationally by developing tools such as the creative footprint that is one of the staples of the work that Mirik and Lutz are doing together by creating VibeLab. But that's just a brief introduction. And I think right now we're in a moment where we are reflecting on how this movement has grown. And I think it's fantastic to take stock on how many cities, how many voices, how many advocates have been joining this movement, and to hear from Lutz and Mirik a little bit about how these all came to be and what has been their role and influence in this process.
Exactly. Please, Mirik and Lutz, tell us, how did it all start in Berlin and Amsterdam? And how did this idea of a night mayor even first come to be and emerge? And what inspired you personally to be involved in such a great movement?
Let's start. Mirik, maybe you start with the night mayor, and then I bring the perspective of the club commission to it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm pleased to. I think the journey in Amsterdam already started back in 2003. That was very early days, and there was a politician who later was a board member for our foundation. He very much understood that when you're working in City Hall, it's very difficult to penetrate the city's nightlife or the nighttime economy because these worlds are very far apart. And what we have seen happening definitely in Amsterdam and also many other cities around the world is that it often starts with a crisis, an incident, something that really starts moving things forward. Either it could be venues that are lost, it could be a new regulation that is coming out of City Hall, it could be that there is a lot of red tape that people try to cut through. And the night is so important from social, cultural, and economic perspective, and it really drives. It really drives the urban economy. It really drives the creative industry. We often like to say is like, think about all the DJs, VJs, live musicians, production people. There are so many people working in nightlife, developing their talents. The night really is a serious playground. It's a place for people to develop their talents, to find their voice. Because really often when people engage in nightlife, it's often very transformative years that really think also or feed into how you think in the rest of your life. So for Amsterdam, it was also definitely the case that people felt like Amsterdam was turning into an open air museum. And that was not, so people also went onto the streets, and that's really where this conversation started. I think my role in this process has been, I was elected in 2012. I always have to say that the role in Amsterdam, the Night Mayor, is independent non-for-profit. So we're not working for the city directly. But I think what we and our team from 2012 were able to do is that we tried to professionalize the role. Before that time, it was more on an independent, from an independent perspective. We tried to structure it better, really get the mayor's office and the mayor involved. And we really see that we operated between the nightlife operators, the city council and the city council and the mayor, of course, but also city residents. And really, that is the holy triangle. And then you can see the Night Mayor being there in the middle. So that's really where our journey started. I want to say a few more words, but I want to give the space to Lutz to speak about Berlin as well.
Yeah, so the work of the Clubcommission in Berlin started a bit earlier, already in 1999, 2000. I wasn't involved before 2004. So there were some years where club owners gathered together in a club and invited a politician, which was apparently also not very usual that they meet together in a club. And I think this politician told the club owners, we as the administration and the parliament, we are not talking to every individual entrepreneur. There needs to be an organization that represents you. And so it was actually a politician who brought this group kind of into the idea of creating a commission to represent them. And so the Clubcommission was founded mostly because there were a lot of raids in that time, the fall of the wall. Then the 90s were pretty wild west in Berlin. Then at one point, the administration started to work and they saw this is not actually legal, what things that people are doing here. They kind of reacted very, in a way that was not really, not suitable. I think you need to have, as an administration, you also have to service the community. You also have to advise and not just enforce. And there was definitely too much enforcement in that time. So kicked off the Clubcommission, it was more a reactive organization. So if something happened, now we have an organization, now we can say something. And when I was involved as a member first, supportive in the background, because I was still running a club, I was a promoter. So for me, it was a bit, just looking into these topics. And I was interested because I also had issues with neighbors in my venue. So I was trying to learn from others how to deal with this. But 2009, it wasn't when I became the spokesperson to the Clubcommission, which is a voluntary position where you get elected by the clubs. I was confronted basically with the aftermath of the global crisis, the financial crisis that was happening, because 2010 the money came back basically into real estate, and that led to a lot of cancellation of contracts. So venues that were temporarily kind of tolerated in certain areas, they basically got their contract canceled. And some of them were really famous, such as Bar 25 or Knack Club and many others. My role in the beginning was much more mobilizing and protesting, because we had not really the feeling that anybody understands what impact that has on Berlin if all these venues are closing. And so I tried to create awareness about this community. I organized protests. We protested together with David Hasselhoff and Roger Waters at the East Side Gallery. We mobilized people, tens of thousands of people, and we did petitions and a lot of things. In that time, the only persons that would like to talk to us or understood that we need a counterpart in government were tourism and the economic creative industry department. So we also were in a box where we didn't really want to be, and, from a touristic perspective, yes, we need tourists in the city, but we also want to have guests who are like, a club is for people that come there regularly. So we're not there for only day tourists or weekend tourists. We also want to build up our community. And so tourist is always like a two-sided sword in dealing with it. Yes, it's income, but it's not, the community that we want to build up. And yes, we are also creative industries, but we also culture, and we also city development, and we also doing a lot of social work that needs to be recognized. So there was a lot of awareness that we have to create within the city. And we started to build this up and so moved from awareness to more having access to decision makers, to the public. And maybe that's a couple of words of the start of our work.
So starting very grassroots, very bottom up, and trying to work the way through to have some influence and to meet the right decision makers. So it seems that the stories both in Berlin and Amsterdam were to some extent, of course, quite similar. Which brings me to the next question of the VibeLab, because although you've been in two different cities, at some point your paths have crossed, and you've created this one big think tank and company together, which has a very active role in shaping the global nightlife policy through consultancy. Can you tell us something more about that? How did it happen, and why did you see that there might be an appetite and need for such a consultancy and for such a knowledge sharing platform?
Yeah, thank you. If you would allow me to jump in there. I think the journey of Lutz and myself started in 2016 when we in Amsterdam with our team organized what we know now was the first ever conference on nighttime governance. And I remember so well, Lutz and I, we met each other on a few conferences around the world because it's a very global topic. You really see that, these issues are very localized, but actually it's, you can transport it almost everywhere, and the local context is different, but the issues are often the same. And in that time, we organized the Night Mayor Summit, and I went to the Mayor of Amsterdam, Eberhard van der Laan, who is unfortunately not with us anymore. But I told him, I said, I want to organize. He was organizing the Mayors Conference because the Netherlands was chair of the EU in that period. And I said, you're organizing the Mayors Conference. I want to organize the Night Mayor Summit. So I will do the off-schedule program. And we had a mayor that was really he said, I like that idea and I'm going to support you. And that's really what you need. You really need leadership. You really need people that dare to push something forward. Of course, it's safe. He was a former lawyer. It needs to be safe. It needs to be well organized. It should not have too much impact. And that conference really started a conversation. What I very much, Lutz and I really connected at that conference. I know also that what really sparked what sparked in me is that Lutz is somebody that is really good and try in bringing a different perspective on things that always happen in the same way. And bringing that different perspective is in a topic like this, where you're saying we're building awareness, we're trying to educate people, we're trying to get access to decision makers, because we need to have a seat on the table to make our voice heard, and to come up also with a unified approach. But we always need to think about, but we also need to think about who's the person that is not sitting on this table, who doesn't have a voice in this conversation. Because nighttime governance is all about collaboration. It's all about working together and finding solutions, and sometimes they're not the most logic, what you think, but it's really all often solution based. So as we just explained, Lutz and I are very much rooted in advocacy work. That's really where we're stemming from. That's really also our passion. And that's also why we came up with the idea when I stepped aside in the Night Mayor role and we realized that we had a really shared passion, always for innovation, always trying to innovate, come up with new ideas. In Amsterdam, that was, for example, the introduction of 24-hour licensed venues. That was a very important step in Amsterdam, because we were able to convince the mayor and other people that sometimes you need to spread people out over the night instead of letting all people venture out in the street all at the same time. Oh, apologies. And because like if you have 1,000 people on the street, it's a demonstration. And of course, this will cause maybe disturbance for people. So that's really where how our journey started, being advocates, being champions for nighttime governance, for the role of club commissions and night mayors. And we really also understood that we don't always want to be on the barricades. We want to be at the front end of the decision making and the policy making. And that's really what I think what we try to do with VibeLab as a consultancy, helping cities restructure their nighttime governance structures, helping cities gather a lot of data. And I would love for Lutz to speak a little bit more about how data gathering has become such a fundamental part of what we do with VibeLab. And it's still also that educational part, bringing stakeholders together, letting them explain that they have an opportunity by working together. They have an opportunity to influence things. Because yes, when we say we introduce 24-hour licenses for businesses, a lot of people think like, oh, that will never happen in my city. But you need to take the first step, and that's where it all starts. Handing over to you, Lutz.
Yeah, I think when Mirik and I met, we had a different role. Mirik was very much in balancing out the different interests that are in the city, and I was still in very protest mode. So we kind of learned from each other. Mirik maybe to be a bit more edgy and also stand up for things, because he also understood that there is a subculture that needs to also be represented by him. Not the kind of the big venues and the venues that are always at the table usually, because if you have conversations with them, there are people who are always there and other ones that are not, because you have to reach out specifically to them. And I was learning from Mirik how this can actually be a thing, and how governments can also recognize beyond Sunday speeches, as we say in German, to be very, to talk, but not to action anything. And so I think there was inspiration from both sides. And for me, I more and more came out of this protest mode into being constructive and being very critical distance still to governments, but being constructive. And I had a conversation at the Chamber of Commerce. So I was involved and also in the Chamber of Commerce, and we also started a music board in Berlin, which was a funding body, which basically we organized to get money for the Club Commission as well. So, to kind of have a bit more planning perspectives, because in that moment we still were depending on membership fees, and we only got like funding for maybe 1 or 2 years, but we didn't really have like a long-term perspective. We were a very small team. So just a perspective, we started with like half a person in the office, and now we're 20 in Berlin. So it just grew over the years. But I had this one conversation, and that also maybe explains a bit like how we came into the idea of collecting data and doing research. So I was in the moment, the first study that we did in the Club Commission was an economic study, and it was impressive numbers. We had some headlines about it, and people say, oh yeah, there's like nightlife is important. There are people working, and the tourists are coming, etc. But it was not really reflecting what our community is about, because we're not thriving by more turnover and more people employed and more tourists coming to the city. That's not what thrives. Our thrive we are by the art that we can do, by the community, the places where we can facilitate people. So this is something that we are passionate about, and economic numbers didn't really reflect it. So we needed to have different numbers. And I had this one conversation which was eye-opening at the Chamber of Commerce, because they understood, okay, there is some kind of a conflict between the real estate industry and the creative community. Maybe let's bring them together, because they were different committees and they didn't talk to each other, and let's bring them together in one committee. And I was sitting there at the table with people who were administrating billions of euros in family offices and whatever. And they didn't have any clue about what Berlin is about and what we are doing. And when we were saying like we are representing the creative industries, to try to use words they understood, the creative industries. Yeah, my son is playing the guitar, so they were really way off of what is actually so for us, it was important to get out of this very emotional conversation, to talk about one venue that had to close down, which was very important because for them it was like, yeah, maybe this is part of your scene. Maybe you have to move around in the city. Isn't that like how it goes? And we were like, does it make us more creative when we are displaced and we losing communities and we're kind of getting gentrified? So we came up with the idea to actually have numbers to argue, and the creative footprint, our methodology, that was basically kicked off in that conversation, because there was of course the carbon footprint that companies were understanding and measuring the amount of carbon they're using. And so I thought maybe you need a creative footprint, which shows how much space does a city have for creative communities. And basically when you're planting 3 trees and you chop them down, you have to plant them somewhere else. And so the idea of measuring this and to monitor it also, because it is a very dynamic industry. There's a lot of movements happening, but somebody has to measure it, because otherwise you're waking up at one day and all the clubs are gone because nobody really kept track and nobody were protecting them. And so that was the kickoff of the methodology. Long story short, I met a professor from Harvard who was at a conference speaking, and said, I think that's a really interesting concept. I give you some students support, and they're all in statistics and they know how to set up a spreadsheet for this. So let's collaborate. And that was kind of how we started to actually create numbers and create a methodology and have numbers that reflect who we are and what we're doing, and not just economic.
I think what is really nice about the creative footprint methodology is we have been able now to research. In this month, we are presenting our 8th study, our 8th city, which is Copenhagen. In the recent years, we have researched very big markets, but also smaller markets. So we have researched Tokyo, New York, Berlin, to name a few. Cities are very close to my heart, but also cities like Montreal, Stockholm, or Sydney. What is interesting is that you now are able to compare cities with each other. So it's, of course, in a way, it's a benchmarking of nighttime governance structure. So we are measuring the amount of creative space that the city has, but we're also very much looking into these cultural and creative communities and what kind of content, because we believe that a healthy nighttime economy, it all sits around the creative production. It all sits around, where the either music, gastronomy, literature, art, spoken word, or either performing arts, that's what really drives it, because it also influences how people behave when they act out. So of course, an issue is always noise disturbance, these kinds of things. But you will know that when people coming to an event or going out at night, because they're very much interested in what is happening there, they will also are more well behaved at the end of the night. So we see that a lot of culture is also paid for by, for example, alcohol sales. So when we advise cities around the world, we always tell them, you need to make sure that you have the infrastructures and education in place, and that you really try to educate your scene and to build capacities, because you need to you need to make sure that the city is vibrant, the city is safe at night, and that you can really and that's really what makes the city interesting to live in, and what also, of course, drives economic development, but most importantly, builds social cohesion. And especially in the world today, I really often that at night the most progressive, forward-thinking, and open-minded come together, and through art and culture, we can build social cohesion, and the night is a very big part of that.
Maybe I can jump in here a little bit and reflecting on what Mirik was just saying of building capacity. I think that something that was happening right around 2018, 2019 was that we were seeing how this capacity was growing. And actually, Mirik and I worked together on a qualitative study in 2018 and 19 that led to a paper. And we started to take inventory on how many offices, how many independent or within City Hall, dedicated teams were created to support nighttime planning, nighttime urbanism. And we mapped them out, and we were able to identify there were two types. So these night mayors and managers were either independent advocates or they were supported by City Hall. But most of them were quite young at the time. They were coming from advocacy and had limited policymaking skills or access to changing legislation, to influencing legislation. They had very limited support in terms of resources, and we didn't know what was going to happen with this group. So put that there, freeze that, COVID comes, and many things start shifting. And I think both of you, both Lutz and Mirik, mentioned how sometimes it starts with a crisis, and how enter the COVID-19 pandemic, many things that we were already seeing that were developing around the world started shifting in different directions. How, of course, the huge impact that the crisis had around the world and everything we do, everything we know, but particularly on life at night. From the economic perspective, of course, the mass layoffs, the business closures, the supply chain disruptions, but also from cultural impact, the closure and disappearance of many cultural venues, the digital shift, how we started many events moving online. That was also an opportunity in many cases, not just a challenge. But I think it's important for us to reflect, and I want to hear from both of you how you saw that the COVID pandemic shifted this growing movement and capacity building and growth that we were seeing right before 2020, and also what kinds of actions came to be to support this movement.
Yeah, maybe I kick off. So Berlin was, of course, very much, but the city is built on its creative industry. We don't have a big harbor. We don't have the big industries place here. So creative industries is our main income, and it's built on scenes like the club scene. And so on the day of the lockdown, everything came to a still, and we have already had conversations within the club commission, what we're going to do, how we're going to react. And on the day of the lockdown, we decided then to start a streaming platform and a donation campaign that basically was streaming out of clubs with an artist on stage and showing that the club is empty and we basically need help. And this whole campaign went over 90 days. 90 consecutive streams from 90 different clubs. And we collected just in Berlin about 800,000 euros on donation. And we had all the media and publicity that you need to get also financial support, which was actually very supportive, I must say, in our case. But what it did was, and with the help of VibeLab, it was spreading all over the world. So 120 cities joined in this campaign, which is called United We Stream. And we, I think, globally collected around 2 million euros in the end, and to support local vulnerable communities. I think in May 2020, I reached out to Mirik and also to Andreina and to our partner at the University of Pennsylvania, Michael Fitchman. And we had this conversation among us and said, we actually need something like a recovery plan. And this was May 2020, because we were kind of thinking, how long does this lockdown? Probably like end of the year, we are over it. Apparently it didn't. But we started a kind of research piece, which had in the end 7 chapters and was involving, 70, 80 people from research, practitioners, people in government. And we worked only online together, collaborated. Nobody got paid for what they did. So it was really a true collaborative research. And so the Global Nighttime Recovery Plan was something that a lot of cities were looking into, learning from case studies from different cities, understanding how important it is to have also representation, somebody who's kind of managing the crisis. And it also showed us how vulnerable we are and how little resilience there is actually in such a crisis, how dependent we are on, public support. So, yeah, I think, I don't know, all of us can share what they learned through this crisis, but I think we all learned that how important nightlife is for cities, for people, how it also influences the safety perception of a city when people are on the street, when the city is not dark and empty. And it also shows how how these communities are also like families for many people. And especially when you're, not living close to your families, or if you're part of a LGBTQ plus community, these are the spaces where you meet your friends, your kind of family, and they were all closed, and some of them also disappeared, I must say. And so, yeah, I think that was an important kickoff for a global movement of nighttime governance, and to also understand from a city perspective that they also need to support, not only in a crisis, but also beyond.
What are your reflections, Mirik, also in terms of the current challenges? Because as you Lutz said, definitely it was a huge learning, and also reflecting on that, thinking about the current needs and current challenges. What do you think are some of the gaps that cities still have if it comes to support to the nighttime economies and cultures?
Yeah, for sure. I think what is really interesting also out of the global nighttime recovery plan also came a WhatsApp group where as soon as there's a new night mayor, we place this night mayor or club commission or night czar, we place them into this group, and then directly the knowledge sharing starts working, because that's also what we in VibeLab hold very high, is that like to be open source, to help each other, because that's also what Nightlife basically is built on. There's a lot of, we always say, dirty hours that go into, or love hours that go into building a scene and building a community. And I think that's a very key and core value of what we do. I think that definitely this the pandemic has also led to, also propelled this industry or nighttime governance forward, is that there's more funding, more support, more infrastructure. But the current challenges that we see are very much around, and this is something that hasn't stopped. It's very much that gentrification, although that nightlife, and that we have seen that also in the work that Andreina and we did together, is that nightlife really often is a driver for area development. There's many formal industrial areas that have, through creative communities and through nightlife establishments, have been primed basically for further urban development. And that's also that these venues are often, the first victims of their own success. As soon as they make an area popular, real estate development comes in. But it's also, that's something that I see as a real big challenge in cities around the world, that the developing of the land price is an essential part of how cities work and how cities operate. And place making, of course, is a very big part of this. So we see the cost of living, we had, of course, our energy crisis recently that makes it much more difficult. We also see a changing behavior. People, and definitely the younger generations growing up there, they also are more aware, which I think is really good. We see that people are searching for diversification of the offering. It's not only about dancing all night long, but it's also like, what else can I do at night, which we really support as well. Whether this is movie nights, theater nights, etc. We still feel there's a very strong need for, in our opinion, the modern day nightclub is always multidisciplinary. We feel that that's also from all the research that we have done over the years. We see that that venues or places basically that are more resilient when they're also they have a mix of functions, And if it's bar, gallery, co-working space, there's even a venue in Amsterdam for a while that had a kindergarten. So it's really about using buildings more effectively, using them for the whole 24-hour cycle. But it also, we also see that there's changing behavior, as I mentioned before. Some, people also want to dance and want to socialize, but maybe less into the night. For certain groups, that is not in every city the same, but certain groups, that is from our recent research that we have done in Amsterdam, we have seen that there's a changing behavior patterns. But we also see that, of course, our work is shifting online, and our work is also shifting into the night. If we put a dot on the horizon, and Andreina, you can speak more about this yourself, but we also see that, work in the future will also shift more into the night. There will be places around the world that will just be too hot to work during the day. And we are also working across time zones. Our company, VibeLab, is a remote company. We have people based in Amsterdam, Berlin, Sydney, even Montreal. So we are basically spread around the whole world. And that also
and
means
India.
that and yeah, and India as well. So we have people everywhere, and that also, yeah, you also need to be conscious of how you use your time and use your energy, and to be mindful and taking a mindful approach. But the core is also in for us very much in the current political climate as well, that we need these spaces. And the notion of something that we've been recently working on is also third spaces. So places which are not school, which are not work, where you can socialize, come together, share ideas, and develop how you think. And that those are, to protecting those spaces is one of the, and preserving nighttime culture is one of the core missions of VibeLab.
Yeah, maybe just to add one more thing, I think what is also a very important trend that we can see is the changing market in real estate. So there's less demand for retail spaces. There's less demand for big office spaces in inner cities. So there is a big shift, and there's also like a lot of question marks from a city perspective. What are they gonna do with these spaces in the cities? Because the value of them is very, very high still, and some of them need to go bankrupt probably 2 or 3 times that they can rent out to normal prices that a cultural venue can afford. So there is a big transition happening, and we as a nighttime community, we have to sit at a table when these decisions are being made. We have to come up with ideas. We are creative, so we have ideas, but we have to be in these conversations. And unfortunately, in many cities, these decisions are being made in the back room somewhere with like important stakeholders, but you're not having a seat at a table. So nighttime governance is also important to get out of this only administrative work also into, city planning and being kind of facilitator of conversations with the real estate industry, but also thinking about regulations, because in all big cities, we see that there is still a domination and we are filling gaps, even though we are so important, as Mirik just explained.
Mm-hmm. One important thing I think that has come up is how it's clear that nighttime activity, that nightlife, night culture, there are spaces for innovation. It's pretty clear how through COVID, we were able to see, because of the absence of these spaces, we were forced to think in new ways of how to reclaim them, how to fulfill certain social functions or certain creative functions anyway, and find new mediums for that. But it's also interesting how, because of these, when these absences exist, when we lose our creative spaces, our cultural spaces, whether because of a crisis or because of other pressures like the ones you've been mentioning, so gentrification or real estate pressures or shifts in preferences, how they also bring to our attention that there are these formal and informal networks of people that keep cities running. So it's not just about, of course, about the industries, but also about the individuals and how these night shift workers and these people who work in these communities keep things going. So it's clear that it's a very important topic that is very transversal and touches on so many aspects, environmental, social. But it's from your perspective of running this business and consultancy globally, it's clear that there are these common patterns and these common trends and these common lessons learned. But what are the main challenges you see still happening, the misconceptions and the prejudice and the myths that you think still exist around life at night and night culture that we still need to change and shift? How can we move beyond, the advocacy into the policy, and what kinds of challenges you're seeing when you speak to policymakers, when you speak to mayors, when you speak to private sector? What's that main misconception that's still going on, regardless of geography, that we're still seeing globally?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think the night has been demonized for such a long time. Maybe it goes back into it goes back into ancient times, and I think we also need to demystify, what the night brings, and to really show that value. So our approach has always been getting the right people to the table, making sure that you're working from an evidence-based by collecting data and by collecting insights. We still see that there's more and more cities that are interested in this topic. I think 80, maybe to 100 cities. But it definitely also starts with how cities are wired. I think that's where, and I've mentioned this before, I think that's what is the main challenge that the night is working against. trying to cut through the red tape, trying to create opportunities, because like what often the night often needs is places where they can experiment, where they can come, where people can come together, which is affordable and accessible space is an essential part of a vibrant nighttime communities. And we also need to keep asking those questions when cities or new areas in cities are planned and developed. What is the percentage of a place where we can innovate and create? And isn't that a very vital part of placemaking and setting up new neighborhoods? So demystifying the conversation. And I still really feel that, capacity building is something which is essential. We see that peer-to-peer learning is still very essential, and that works on different levels. It works on the level of nighttime governance and cities, as we brought together the night mayors in one WhatsApp group and them sharing knowledge. But it also is peer-to-peer learning from nighttime operators. We have created a project which is called Night School, where we have worked with 15 creative producers from all over Europe, and where we really brought them together. We educated them with specialists and in a variety of fields, from social, sustainable, and economic part, but really that peer-to-peer learning and sharing knowledge and ideas and how people approach things, that is very, very important part. But it also, so that is between, nighttime operators, but it also, what is also very important is, for example, how we deal with safety. And from a safety and community building aspect, is also something, it's a key challenge. When we say global, that's also what the pandemic learned us, is when we say global, we also need to be respectful that a global doesn't mean a global north. We also need to look at what's happening in the global south. Lutz has been a driver for a project which was called Neighborhoods for All, a project we did together with UN Habitat, that really looked at how can we make neighborhoods safer for girls and women to operate to be able to go to work at night, and to also think about how through community building you can make safer spaces and areas more safer. Because when people are not intrinsically motivated to take care of their neighborhood, you can parachute some things in, but then they need to own that space themselves to take care of it. So those are things. So just coming back to what are these challenges? Lack of resources in the government side, but we can do something from the bottom up, which is also the core, and really working from peer-to-peer learning is an essential part of how we build our cities.
Yeah, I think it comes down to an understanding that the night needs to be governed differently. So the night demands structure and freedom. And you have this essential role in a city for so many different aspects. So it's also important to have it cross-departmental. So there needs to be a collaboration within the government with also the community stakeholders. And I think that is something that also has to be learned from in different cities, because that is a new way of how to build up a governance structure. So it's also about how can we keep gaps and gray zones, and also not just overregulate things, and where can we keep government out of the regulation. So yeah, there's a lot of bureaucratic constraints that need to be loosened, but on the same time we also have to regulate, as for instance the real estate market, in a way to have this freedom. So I think that's a big learning, and we haven't still found the holy grail how to do that in a perfect way. We're still learning. It's still a very young movement. But since also Mirik mentioned, we collaborate, we work together, we share case studies. We could do more of it. We could have more conversations, more deep conversations about and sharing knowledge globally, because even though there are the differences between the global north and so-called global south, but there's a difference in corruption is, for instance, and all these kind of things that we have to deal with. But when there's nightlife, there are also people who are complaining about it. People want to sleep, people want to party, people want to socialize, other people don't. And so I think we have to deal with similar issues on different levels. And it's very important to share these best practices, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You just have to adapt it in a good way.
Speaking of recommendations and knowledge sharing and also inspiration from different cities, I would love to close up and ask you for, first of all, your favorite nighttime city globally, both global north and the south. And the second thing is about a book recommendation. If you could share something with us, with the listeners, but also with probably some of the policymakers listening to us, how could we inspire them?
Should I go first? Yeah, I think it's not really fair if you're like 15 years advocating for a city to ask like, what is your favorite city? But maybe I can say besides Berlin, I think there is. I was always inspired by nightlife in Latin America. I just came back from Medellin and Bogota. I went many times to cities like Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. And I think what fascinates me about nightlife there is also how public space is being kind of claimed from people. We don't know that so much at least in Northern Europe, how also public space is being used until like nights. I think very famous in Brazil are the blocos, where full neighborhoods start to lighten up and everybody is coming together, not only the party people, but also the barbershop and the repair garage, and everybody is kind of collaborating in a neighborhood and bringing bringing the night into the light. So I think that's fascinating for me, always was. And when it comes to book recommendations, I was reading a book. It's in German. I'm not sure if they have it in a translated word, but it's translated called "When the Night Falls," and it's those are stories about 1920s and 30s in different parts of the world, from Cairo to Berlin, and how people really tell what's happening at night. It's very, very moving from perspective to understand like how people see what's happening in a bar and how people behave there, and what's happening, how to compare this also to the day. So it was always magical for me to observe the night and to see how people have transformative realities, how they find themselves, but also losing themselves in a moment. And we need to have these spaces, especially in times where everything is digital and transparent and cameras everywhere. We also need these moments of being ourselves.
Yeah, so definitely echoing, of course, what Lutz is saying. There is, when I was the Night Mayor of Amsterdam, that was also made me very proud to be able to work for the city. I think there's no greater honor than to advocate for your scene, and I did it with a lot of pleasure. I think the best time of the year for me personally, because of course, my background, I've been a nightlife promoter since I was 20. The best time of the year to be in Amsterdam is, in my opinion, during Amsterdam Dance Event. Then the city is flooded with electronic music from all over the world. There's 500,000 people attending, more than 200 parties that are being organized over those 5 days. And an interesting little note there is that that this event, although there's so many people, 100,000 foreign visitors, for the police, it's not busier than a regular Saturday night, which shows if people are coming for content, if you're coming for a show, if you're coming for your famous DJ, then you will also behave better when leaving the night. So content should always be in its core. When I have to think about another city, for me, I had the pleasure to visit Tokyo many times. And what I really love about Tokyo, it's not famous for its nightclubs per se. There you definitely have to go to Berlin. Of course, there are a few very influential places there, but for a city with, I don't know, 33 million people, there's not so many of those places. But what I love and what we have named the Tokyo Flow is the adventure you can have in a city like Tokyo. That you move from one space to the next. You go to a little crazy little bar where somebody is really crafting the best drink you could ever had, or then following to, oh, and by the way, there is a exposition opening just around the corner, and we go, and that's really that Tokyo Flow is for us, that adventure that you go on to that night and you meet a lot of different people. You meet different people, different experiences, different places. And then by the end of the night, has been like a whirlwind, a storm, and you lay in bed and you think like, oh my God, this was so amazing. So Tokyo is very close to my heart in that sense. When it comes to books, I think we probably need more. We probably need more writing and more books about the night. I'm a very visual orientated person, so for me there's There's more books which are around photography, but a book that I recently read, and of course we'll place these things in the show notes, as people always say in podcasts. But for me, recently I was reading a book about that was a legacy story about one of the most famous nightclubs in Amsterdam started in the late 80s and went into the 90s. That was a strongly autobiographic book about my mentor in nightlife that he wrote, and that really showed a world where the night is very diverse. It brings a lot of different souls together, and it really shapes the identity of a city and its people.
Cool. We'll, of course, as you said, Mirik, add it in the show notes. This is the idea behind it, to inspire people even more. And to me, there was a huge learning about the capacity, about building the capacity and building the voice, from the grassroots movement, from advocacy to basically creating the policy. So that's a huge learning, and thank you for that. And how about you, Andreina? What did you learn? I hope you managed to still learn something new.
Of course, I'm surprised. I'm not surprised that I always keep learning from these two. It's I've had the privilege of actually exploring several night cities with them, several cities at night with them in different parts of the world. And it's always fascinating to learn from people who come with such a creative and an innovative approach and mindset to really shaping and transforming the way we live in cities. I think it's fantastic to do these kinds of reflections, to think about where we were and where we are now, and what was the theory of change, how things have come to be, and how we've been learning from each other. And I do think I totally agree with what Mirik was saying in terms of peer-to-peer learning. I think that's one of the strongest elements of this nighttime movement, that there's been a lot of collaboration and a lot of willingness to share and to learn with each other and from each other from the beginning. And I think that's an element that really characterizes this field. So I'm excited to see what's coming next and to keep learning from each other.
Lutz and Mirik, thank you very much for joining our, not only the podcast, but especially the series, the Nocturnal Cities, because I think that having your perspective was really, really important to us. And we now have the solid basis for the next episode. So thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, and good luck for the next series.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.